While fat cat generals carved up the world on maps, the fate of a guy in a frozen trench depended on the piece of iron in his hands. Forget great ideas. In 1942, the line between a hero and a corpse was a few millimeters of a steel firing pin. World War II was the last bloody rifle auction, where the stake was life and the lot was the right to shoot first. We're going to expose the truth. Soldiers often went into battle with weapons that were more dangerous to themselves than to the enemy. The world was waiting for the atomic bomb, but the infantry was being driven to the slaughter with paddles designed back in the days of Tsars. It was a technological absurdity, jet planes in the sky and 19th century bolts in hand. In this mad race, every designer tried to outsmart death. Some forged tools for aesthetic snipers, others crude pieces of iron that would fire after a week in a swamp. We're going to strip the gloss from the chronicles and show the underside. How blueprint errors turned into mountains of skulls, and how vaunted reliability turned out to be a cheap myth. This is the story of how steel betrayed men. Let's start with the icon of the Nazi killing machine, the Mauser 98K. Are you ready to hear that this standard of German genius was actually a technical dead end that literally tied the hands of Hitler's soldiers at the critical moment of battle? The truth about the Mauser will make you reconsider the entire outcome of the early war years. German quality or a fatal trap for the Übermensch. The Mauser 98K is the symbol of the blitzkrieg that forced the Wehrmacht infantry to grit their teeth helplessly under fire. This benchmark was actually a relic of the past, forcing Wehrmacht soldiers into a duel against submachine guns while holding what was essentially a hunting carbine. Adopted in 1935, the 98 Short was merely an attempt to rejuvenate a grandfather's 19th century rifle. Yes, it could hit a squirrel in the eye from 500 meters. But in the real hell of combat, 5 rounds and manual reloading turned a German into a slow target. While the soldier yanked the bolt, the enemy sprayed him with a burst. The Mauser's reliability in the mud of the Eastern Front turned out to be a myth. Its filigree mechanics required a sterility that didn't exist in the trenches outside Smolensk. German genius created the perfect weapon for a shooting range, but not for a slaughterhouse where a second's delay meant death. But if the Mauser was a slow aristocrat, then across the ocean they were forging a beast that changed the rules of the game. The Americans created a monster that spat lead with frantic speed. Do you know what sound was called the ping of death, and why the Yanks themselves were terrified of it? Next up, the legendary M1 Garand. While the rest of the world was frantically jerking bolts, the Americans brought a deadly semi-auto to the slaughterhouse. The M1 Garand turned an ordinary private into a mobile machine gun nest. General Patton called it the greatest battle implement ever devised, but he kept quiet about a terrifying detail that made this technological marvel a death trap for the shooter himself. John Garand pulled off a revolution. His rifle reloaded itself using gas energy. A soldier simply pulled the trigger 8 times in a row, unleashing a rain of lead upon the enemy. One American possessed the firepower of 3 Germans with their slow Mausers. But there was a price for this triumph. The cartridges were loaded in a clip, and when they ran out, the empty steel ejected with a loud ping. In the silence of combat, this sound was a signal to the enemy. "I'm empty, kill me." Soldiers believed that this ring was their own funeral march, but if the Garand was a complex predator, in the East they were forging a tool that couldn't be broken even if run over by a tank. What curse did the Soviet 3-line rifle carry, and why did the Germans fear its 4-sided bayonet to their core? Our next stop is the Mosin Nagant. While the West was polishing bolts, the USSR created a crowbar capable of killing. The Mosin Nagant is the steel grin of socialism, forged through mud and frost. Do you think of it as a primitive paddle? You're wrong. It's the only tool in history that served as both a club and a sniper's surgical scalpel. But behind the legend lurked a curse that forced soldiers to risk their lives for a single shot. The Mosin design is the apotheosis of grim simplicity. It digested ammunition that would jam any other weapon. But there was a fatal detail, the zeroing. Most 3-liners were accurate only with the bayonet fixed. Remove it, and the bullets flew wide. The Soviet soldier was forced to lug this 5-foot behemoth through the tight ruins of Stalingrad, constantly snagging on walls. Reloading required raw strength. Sometimes the bolt had to be opened with a kick. This was a weapon for men made of steel, ready to endure hellish ergonomics for the sake of crushing power. But while the Russians relied on brute force, the British were setting speed records. You won't believe what a rifle with a magazine twice the size of its competitors is capable of. How did the British make their enemies believe they were holding machine guns? Next up, the Lee Enfield, the queen of rapid fire. Want to dominate the battlefield without an automatic? British gentlemen knew a secret that turned an infantry company into a wall of continuous lead. While the Germans and Soviets counted every bullet, His Majesty's soldiers gave the enemy a mad marathon. You won't believe it, but this rifle allowed for such rapid fire that the enemy would flee their positions in terror, convinced they were facing an army of machine gunners. The secret of the Lee Enfield No. 4 lay in its 10-round magazine, twice the capacity of its competitors, and a unique bolt action that worked faster than lightning. The rear-locking lugs allowed a soldier to cycle the action without taking his eye off the sights. Well-trained Brits could pump out up to 30 rounds per minute, a trick known as the Mad Minute. While a German was still yanking his Mauser's bolt for the second time, the Brit had already turned him into Swiss cheese. However, they paid for that speed with raw power. The .303 British round was finicky, forcing soldiers to literally drench the enemy in lead to ensure a result. But while the British relied on speed, in the jungles of Oceania, the Japanese were creating a weapon for fanatics. The toughest steel and optics that shouldn't have existed. Why did the Arisaka Type 99 become a black mark for US Marines? And what shameful end awaited this samurai iron? Up next, the exotic Arisaka. Meet the rifle that American gunsmiths considered indestructible and Japanese soldiers viewed as a sacred gift from the Emperor. The Arisaka Type 99 was built to survive where everything else rotted, in the sticky hell of the Pacific jungles. But why did this perfect weapon, capable of withstanding an explosion, ultimately become the symbol of the greatest collapse of Japanese industry? Arisaka's designers created the strongest bolt group of World War II. The chrome-lined barrel, an unheard-of luxury at the time, protected against corrosion in 100% humidity. This rifle even featured folding anti-aircraft sights meant to shoot down planes. Madness? Perhaps, but the Japanese believed in it. The 7.7mm round was equal in power to the world's best. However, at the war's end, imperial pride turned into a catastrophe. As resources dried up, Arisakas were manufactured from low-grade metal without protective coatings. The final, last-ditch Type 99 series turned into ersatz sticks that literally exploded in their owner's hands upon firing. But if the Japanese ended the war with dangerous junk, the Italians started it with a rifle that historians would call the greatest loser of the century. How did a weapon that decades later would be used for the most infamous shot in US history come to be considered practically harmless on the battlefield? Meet the cursed Carcano. Before you is the most controversial rifle in history. On one hand, Mussolini's shameful defeats. On the other, the fatal shot in Dallas that killed John F. Kennedy. How did a piece of Italian hardware, which the world dismissed as a child's toy, become the deadliest tool in the hands of a lone assassin decades later? The Carcano M91/38 was an attempt to make war comfortable. The Italians created a light and maneuverable carbine, but they made a fatal error. They chose the 6.5mm round. On paper, it offered low recoil. In reality, the bullet lacked the stopping power to drop an enemy in their tracks. While others were punching through walls, the Italians discovered their humane bullets struggled against even a thick greatcoat. The complex N-block clip system often failed in the mud, turning an elegant carbine into a useless stick. It is a grim irony that a weapon deemed worthless on the battlefield achieved horrific fame in the hands of a political assassin. But if the Carcano lacked muscle, our next hero was a heavyweight that knew no compromise. An American old-timer that forced the US to pay fines to the Germans for every bullet fired. How did the Springfield M1903 manage to survive in the shadow of the Great Garand? Next up, a classic with a German accent. Did you know that for every rifle the Americans used to kill their enemies, they had to pay? Germany itself? The Springfield M1903 was so blatantly copied from the German Mauser that the US government lost a lawsuit and paid royalties to the enemy even in the heat of conflict. But this clone proved so successful that even the ultra-modern Garand couldn't send the old man to the scrapyard. The Springfield is the aristocrat of weaponry. Its powerful .30-06 round turned any hit into a guaranteed one-way ticket. Its accuracy was phenomenal. While the infantry sprayed the jungles with lead from semi-automatics, Marine snipers reached for the M1903. Its bolt operated with surgical precision, ensuring the bullet didn't deviate by a single millimeter. It was the perfect scalpel. However, in a mass meat grinder, its 5-round capacity and slow reload became a death sentence. A soldier with a Springfield was a god at half a kilometer, but became a target the moment the enemy got within grenade-tossing range. But accuracy is only half the battle. The real test began where the firing ranges ended and the thick trench mud began. Which of these legends turned to junk after the first rain, and which one kept firing even when choked with sand? Ahead, the battle for survival in hellish conditions. What good is accuracy if a rifle turns into a club after the first trek through a swamp? Engineers created masterpieces in their labs, but World War II quickly stripped the masks off these prima donnas. Which of these steel giants will survive the muck of Stalingrad, and which will shamefully jam in the heat of an attack? The moment of truth has arrived. The triumph of brute force over sterile aesthetics. The battle for reliability divided weapons into two camps. On one side were the Mauser and the Springfield. Their mechanisms were fitted so tightly that a single grain of sand could turn them into scrap metal. Wehrmacht soldiers spent hours cleaning their rifles, knowing that dirt was an enemy more terrifying than the partisans. On the other side was the Soviet Mosin. Its tolerances were so loose that it kept firing even when choked with sand. While the American Garand demanded lubrication and the Japanese Arisaka threw tantrums in the humidity, the Soviet soldier simply wiped the bolt on his greatcoat and went into battle. It was the triumph of primitivity over complexity. But reliability is only half the story. What happens when the bullet hits its mark? We have reached the bloodiest part, whose bullet tore the soul out of the enemy even through brick, and who was merely shooting peas. Ahead, the magic of calibers and the shocking truth about stopping power. You can argue endlessly about rate of fire, but in war, the winner is the one whose bullet settles the matter once and for all. It is a mistake to think all calibers are equal. While some soldiers watched the enemy get back up after being wounded, others saw a hit literally throw a man backward. Whose steel possessed the most monstrous stopping power? The battle raged between the heavy sledgehammers. The American .30-06 and the Soviet 7.62 by 54R punched through brick walls and turned helmets into paper. But there was an outsider in this debate, the Italian 6.5mm. Its bullet often zipped right through the body, leaving a neat wound that allowed a soldier to continue his charge. Meanwhile, the British .303 bullet was designed with more cunning. Upon impact, it began to tumble, turning vitals into mincemeat. It bordered on a war crime, but life was on the line. Either you stopped the enemy with one shot, or he reached you with a bayonet. We have reached the finale. Which rifle earned the title of Queen of the Fields? Which of these steel veterans actually won the war, and which remained merely a beautiful exhibit in a museum of defeat? The results of the great arms race are in the final block. The time has come to drop the masks. Famous names and movie legends are one thing, but the cold statistics of corpses on the battlefield are another. Who truly became the hammer of victory, and who was merely an expensive accessory for the losers? We are drawing the line under the greatest arms race in human history. If we judge by efficiency, two contenders share the crown. The M1 Garand changed the very essence of infantry combat, giving the soldier the power of a machine gun in his hands. It was this rifle that drove the final nail into the coffin of the Axis powers. But if we measure by endurance and the price of victory, the Soviet Mosin has no equal. It was crude, mean, and as relentless as the Siberian frost itself, and it was this rifle that fought its way from the ruins of Stalingrad to the steps of the Reichstag. The German Mauser remained a monument to engineering ego, which shattered against the wall of mass production and simplicity. World War II proved that in war, the winner isn't the one with the most complex sights, but the one whose rifle fires in the mud when the enemy's bolt jams. The era of the bolt-action rifle ended in 1945, giving way to automatic monsters. But the debates over whose stock was sturdier will never fall silent. Which of these legends would you take with you into the trench, knowing your life depended on it? Tell us in the comments. Let's test your intuition.